The fat character is a staple in Western media, especially in animation. A lot of the most popular characters in movies and television are characterized as being overweight, or at least are fat-coded. Homer Simpson, Peter Griffin, Fred Flintstone, Patrick Star, Poe from Kung Fu Panda, Samwise Gamgee, Samuel Tarly, and many more. All of these characters are beloved and recognizable, but here's the thing. All of them are also men. And that leads me to the main talking point of this video. Fat male characters in media are generally viewed more favorably than fat female ones, reinforcing a culture where obesity in men is more accepted than in women, thus creating a double standard. But before I can talk more about this, a spoiler warning for the following TV shows and movies, and a bit of human history as well. And to start this video off, I want to focus on these. So, characters like Peter Griffin and Homer Simpson are celebrated in pop culture. Yes, they are comically obese, and a lot of the humor on these shows is making fun of these characters for that fact. But because these characters are so funny, it's easy to forget that they're supposed to be cautionary tales. They exist to parody the overweight American father and portray him as a have-not. But in modern pop culture, they're incredibly well-known characters whose popularity is evident in the fact that their shows are still going on with no end in sight. And when you have a character that reaches this level of popularity, there are going to be people who completely miss the point and idolize them. It's the same real-world problem that newer characters like BoJack Horseman and Rick Sanchez. Because these characters are so popular and appeal to millions of households across the world, some people are undoubtedly going to think that it's okay to be like them because they bring laughter and make people feel good. And then suddenly we don't see fat characters as those with serious health problems. We see the fat guy characters as funny, warm, friendly, and down to earth. Now the funny fat guy has become a character archetype on its own, and we've seen that this concept is even popular enough to carry a show or movie as a lead. It's in legacy media, like with The Simpsons and Family Guy, or in children's media with shows like Fat Albert, Chowder, and Clarence. Heck, Jack Black made an entire career off of playing this kind of character. Are these characters comically unhealthy? Yes, they are, but culturally they're given a pass because they're funny. But if you try and look for female equivalent for these kinds of characters, you'll be at a loss. And that's because fat female characters simply don't have a comparable level of media representation, barely getting the spotlight. And when they do get meaningful screen time, it's either to antagonize or ostracize them. Old school Disney is a pretty big culprit of this. For example, Ursula from The Little Mermaid is one of the main names I had in mind when making this video. Her massive body acts as a direct contrast to the much more conventionally attractive main character Ariel. The same thing goes for the classic design of the Queen of Hearts from the original Alice in Wonderland. Scary big lady contrasting the skinny pretty one. And other examples like Aunt Sarah from Lady and the Tramp and Madame Mim from Sword in the Stone. Now, of course, Disney has shown a lot of larger male villains like Pete from the classic cartoons and Governor Ratcliffe from Pocahontas, but they also balance out this representation by showing fat male characters as being good guys as well. Belle's father, Maurice from Beauty and the Beast, is a quirky yet endearing old man, and Merida's father, King Fergus from Brave, is a loud but lovable dad as well. And if you want to include non-human characters that are more fat-coded than anything, then there's Baloo from Jungle Book, and Pumbaa from Lion King, and of course Baymax from Big Hero 6. But historically, Disney hasn't shown up when it comes to giving us bigger women to root for. Of course, now things are changing. We've gotten minor characters with a bit more screen time like the mom from Onward and the goat Abby Park from Turning Red, but it still feels like we're a long ways off before we get like a Wreck-It Ralph kind of character. I think a pretty egregious example of this level of bias towards a single body type is in Kim Possible. If you look at the male characters in the show, more often than not, they'll be drawn with a different body type in mind. Kim's dad seems to be the average middle-aged man. Kim's little brothers, Jim and Tim, are your hyperactive kids. Ron is a skinny teenage boy. Wade is a nerdy little fat kid. Mr. Barkin is a broad-shouldered masculine character. And then you get to the male villains, Dr. Draken, Monkey Fist, Senor Senor Senior, Senor Senior Jr., and Duff Killigan. When it comes to the male characters, it's a pretty diverse cast when it comes to body types. And then you get to the female characters and you ask what the heck happened, because it feels like they were all copy-pasted. I mean, the cheerleaders I can understand, but Kim, her mom, Ron's mom, Bonnie, Monique, Shigo, all practically having the same body type is just crazy. In fact, there's a single recurring female character on the show that doesn't have that body type, Dean Amy, and she's of course characterized as a villain. Not just any villain, but a boy crazy one who's supposed to be creepy and obsessive with her crushes, which is an ongoing joke throughout the series. We, the audience, are meant to see her as a have-not. Now, let me be clear, I'm not saying that Kim Possible is a bad show. I actually really like this show, but I'm using it as an example to illustrate a trend that I've noticed in media for a long time, that male characters are allowed to come in all shapes and sizes, but women characters rarely exist outside of a certain body type. And no, it's not just a Disney thing. Shrek 2 antagonizes a larger woman with a fairy godmother. In fact, it's kind of ironic that the core message to Shrek films is that it's what's on the inside that matters when their main antagonists are either short men or fat women. I don't remember anything about the third one. Then in Friends, there's Fat Monica, who is the version of Monica that we see in flashbacks, and she's frequently portrayed as loud, obnoxious, and just plain annoying. This is played for laughs as Monica enjoys not being that version of herself anymore. And then of course there's Family Guy, where Meg is drawn somewhat larger compared to her peers, and she's frequently bullied by other characters on the show. And there's a ton of other examples I could go with. And very interestingly, there's been one consistent exception to this rule, and it's when the fat lady can sing. There's been one form of media that's constantly shown larger bodied women in a light that isn't detrimental, and that's in music, especially musical theater. For one reason or another, in musicals, the fat girl is allowed to exist when she isn't in most other media, like TV and movies. The character archetype is shown in some celebrated Broadway productions, like Chicago, and even taking center stage in Hairspray, paving the way for it to be in other forms of media too. The Muses from Hercules, Mercedes from Glee, and Fat Amy from the Pitch Perfect movies are just more examples of this trope existing. And while these characters are celebrated, ultimately they're a drop in the bucket, and it's highly possible that we'll never see a fat female character reach the same level of recognizability that someone like, say, Patrick Star has. But the question is, why does this disparity exist? Well, culturally, women have stricter beauty standards than men, and among those standards is to have that hourglass figure and a low weight. But for most of human history, women with larger bodies were viewed as the more attractive body type. Prehistoric relics and cave drawings seem to idealize plump women. For example, the Venus figurines, which experts believed represented fertility and ideal womanhood of prehistoric civilization, depicted what we would today consider obese women. Of course, that's just one of the theories though. Then we get to ancient times, specifically ancient Egypt. In this civilization, obesity was considered a sign of royalty, because being obese meant that you had access not just to more food in general, but better food. Sugar, honey, wine, food that common folk wouldn't be able to indulge in. Thus, many Egyptian pharaohs were fat. In fact, archaeologists found out that Queen Hatshepsut, the most famous woman pharaoh, was quite obese because of her diet. She even had tooth problems. And then you get to the Renaissance, where artists like Peter Paul Rubens depicted women with larger bodies as mothers, wives, and lovers, and likely because having a larger build as a woman back then was seen as more beneficial. These examples just show how, historically, being larger as a woman was considered desirable. Having such a body implied comfort. It showed that you had resources at your disposal, or that you were healthier and thus more fertile. But then came the Industrial Revolution. Suddenly, food became a lot easier to come by. Railroads made it easier to set up supply lines and trade routes across long distances. Food processing, like canning and preserving foods, started to happen at scale, and for what feels like the first time in human history, food was abundant. And suddenly, being fat was no longer a status symbol among the elites. In fact, working class people were scarfing down processed foods and canned goods because they were affordable and they couldn't buy more expensive, healthier alternatives. And the cultural pendulum shifted. Suddenly, being thin wasn't equated with malnourishment, but self-discipline and the good life. But there was another thing that the Industrial Revolution brought that would solidify this cultural shift: mass media. It was during this time period that newspapers and magazines started to be printed and distributed at scale, influencing public perception on just about everything. And it was during this time that the female beauty standard of having a slim body was solidified, and this was reinforced as media evolved. We got black and white cartoons featuring iconic characters like Betty Boop. We then got movies starring classic female actresses that followed that body type, like Audrey Hepburn and Marilyn Monroe. Not to mention all those old school ads that used those kinds of models, and before you knew it, slim became the new sexy, at least for women. But men never really faced this level of body idealism. Sure, there's that idea of the tall, dark, and handsome young man, but it's not as idealized as the slim figure is for a woman. It's often said that women are judged for their looks, and men are judged for their deeds, and in media that statement holds true. We often see male characters, particularly those who aren't conventionally attractive, winning over the affection of the beautiful girl character through their valiant deeds. This reinforces the idea that men can still be respected, attractive even, despite lacking in the looks department, if they can make up for it in some way, like being funny or brave or endearing. And we've seen big men find success throughout history. They've won wars like Winston Churchill, they've been world leaders like Taft and Henry VIII, they've pioneered filmmaking and media like Orson Welles and Alfred Hitchcock, and they've been massive names in the music industry like Rick Ross, DJ Khaled, and Elvis Presley. And while these guys have definitely received their fair share of criticism, do you think they've received the same proportional amount of hate as someone like, say, Lizzo? And this might be the part of the video where you expect me to champion gender equality and say that general audiences should be more accepting and we should have more fat women characters in media in an effort to remove this double standard. But that's not what I'm actually going to say. I do think that the double standard is a problem and it is unfair, but there's a bigger problem at play. Remember, the characters like Homer Simpson and Peter Griffin and the like were created as a reflection of society. Characters that we often see in media tend to reflect what we see in real life. But if the average household has a member who's obese, isn't that a problem? I consider overeating to be a bodily vice, like smoking, alcoholism, and doing drugs. It is, after all, putting your health at greater risk because of a lack of self-control. But I also understand that the issue isn't always entirely individual. If one person in 100 is comically obese, then that's their problem. But if a significant percentage of a population, say 40%, then that's a public health and systemic issue. To me, the real problem isn't that there aren't enough fat women in media. It's that we've just accepted that a significant portion of the population is dangerously overweight, and we've just become desensitized to it. And it's not like this problem doesn't have any solutions, because this is primarily a Western phenomenon. If you look at the media from other parts of the world, specifically South Korea and Japan, you'll notice that they don't have as many fat characters, and when they are shown, it's almost always as a have-not. They're usually villains or characters that we're supposed to view as ugly, and that's because, as cultures, they've managed to beat obesity, eliminating the need to reflect such characters in their media. And this was done systematically. Their cities were designed with commuters and pedestrians as a priority, ensuring that their most populated areas aren't car-centric, forcing their populations to get out and walk. They also have cultures where heavily processed foods are treated as occasional treats rather than the most affordable options. And this resulted in Korea and Japan having some of the lowest obesity rates among developed countries around the world. Now, they have their own problems, but that's a topic for another video. Ideally, by systematically reducing obesity and making it easier to live healthy, we would remove the need to show obese men in media, thus removing the double standard. But if none of that's going to happen, which it won't, then what's the harm in leveling the playing field and making a few good guy fat girl characters? And if you liked the video or learned something throughout the way, leave a like if you haven't already, and let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. If you found this video essay interesting and want more content like it, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one.